You breathe into breakthrough. Day 2, and I'm here with Dr. James Gordon. James Gordon is a psychiatrist and former National Institute of Mental Health researcher. He's a clinical professor at Georgetown Medical School and chair of the White House Commission, was chair of the White House Commission on Complementary and Alternative Medicine Policy. He's the author of Transforming Trauma, The Path to Hope and Healing, which represents the culmination of his 50 years as a practitioner, teacher, and advocate of integrative approaches to overcoming psychological trauma and stress. In his role as founder and executive director for the Center of Mind-Body Medicine, CMBM, Dr. Gordon has created and implemented the world's largest and most effective program for healing population-wide trauma. He and his 150 international CMBM faculty have brought this program to war-traumatized populations in the Balkans, the Middle East, and Africa, to first responders, military personnel, and veterans and their families in the US, to communities that have suffered, to numerous disasters, to Native American children and their families, as well as to stressed out professionals, stay-at-home moms, inner city children, White House officials, the US Capitol Police, health professionals and medical students, and people contending with severe emotional and physical difficulties. Dr. Gordon has authored or edited 10 previous books, including Unstuck, Your Guide to the 7-Step Stage Journey Out of Depression. He has written often for popular publications, including New York Times, The Washington Post, The Atlantic, The Guardian, as well in professional journals. Dr. Gordon has also served as an expert for such outlets as 60 Minutes, The Today Show, Good Morning America, CBS Sunday Morning, Nightline, CNN, and MSNBC and NPR. Well, Jim, we are so grateful to have you here today. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Now, you're a world-renowned expert in using mind-body medicine to heal depression, anxiety, and psychological trauma. Can you tell us about your background and what inspired you to get into this work?
Well, I think my own challenges and difficulties are what turned me in the direction of seeing what happens when one suffers a trauma. I didn't really think of it as trauma at the time. And helped me. This is when I was in medical school, and I was not quite sure why I was there. I was troubled by the way patients were treated. Western medicine, as taught, at least as it was taught at Harvard and pretty much every other medical school, felt too narrow, too cut and dry. It lacked imagination, and it lacked the kind of loving, compassionate treatment of human beings that I thought medicine was all about. So I knew I had to take a step back from medical school. And at the same time, my girlfriend and I broke up. Very common, traumatic, and it was traumatic.
Right.
Both she and I had invested, we were very young, but we'd invested so much in our relationship, and then it began to go bad, and we really didn't know why. I think part of it was we simply weren't ready to move ahead and live together or get married. So the two things coming together put me in a state of depression. Right. And during this time, I began really for the first time in my life to look at what was going on inside me. And I went to see a therapist, psychotherapist, and some of you may know him, Robert Coles, who was a professor at Harvard, who'd done a lot of work with kids integrating the schools in New Orleans, the late 50s and early 60s. And he was very kind and compassionate. And he also didn't take me too seriously, which I found very helpful too, because I tended to take myself quite seriously, I think. And I began to see that the difficulties that I was going through could also become quite instructive to me. That I had a false, maybe too strong, but a kind of inaccurate or incomplete sense of who I was. And that this experience, this trauma and the depression that followed it, gave me an opportunity to look more deeply into who I was and to discover parts of myself that I had forgotten, neglected, or hadn't even known about. So that let me know, and this is just after second year of medical school, that it is possible to help people go through very difficult situations and come out on the other side, and also taught me, and I began to practice it in the next couple of years, that I could be someone who could be a midwife to this process. I was not there to fix people. And I understood that too. You have to fix people if you're doing surgery on them. But when people are going through a difficult time, they really welcome, as I did, someone who will be there for them and help them make the discoveries they need to. So that was the beginning. And for whatever reason, I've always been interested in working with the most troubled and traumatized people. And that, who knows exactly where that comes from. I had a couple of fairly crazy parents, so that may have influenced me some. And so I began to bring this approach to all different kinds of people, to old folks who were very ill or dying on the medical and surgical wards, to autistic children. I began to work with them, to schizophrenic kids. And I became interested in really understanding the whole person in their total environment, and then finding, being compassionate and sensitive to the vulnerability, and at the same time helping them discover, just as I had discovered, strengths they never knew they had. So that's the origin, and it's just continued on from there. The more I learned, and again, it was often my own difficulties that prompted me to learn new approaches. You mentioned probiotics.
Yeah.
And in Transforming Trauma, I talk about the vital importance of nutrition, which is in healing trauma, which is almost universally neglected, but it's a crucial element. Well, I began when I came down after my psychiatric residency to the National Institute of Mental Health, and I began to look around and to deal with some of the simple problems that I had, like allergies, seasonal allergies, or like GI distress, or back problems. I began to see the limitations of conventional medicine. For me, I didn't want to take antihistamines that made me fall asleep to deal with my allergies.
Right.
And so I began to look at, are there natural ways? So everything, it's been step by step over the last 50 years. And I'm often both the object and the subject of my experiments, or you could call me I'm my own guinea pig. And I try everything that I teach to others. I first tried that out on myself. And that's the way the whole approach has evolved.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing is that everything is interrelated. So Western medicine often wants to fix an isolated problem like allergies or some ache or pain with aspirin or a pill, but really everything's integrated. And by looking at a holistic approach, we're able to overall improve our overall wellness and our body's ability to heal. So it's just, reinforcing what we've been talking about throughout the summit. So I'd love to hear you talk about what inspired you to write Transforming Trauma, The Path to Hope and Healing.
Well, Transforming Trauma is the result of my 50 years of work with myself and with other people. And it contains in it the program that we use at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine when we're working with traumatized communities. And it's the approach that I've been using for my patients for the last 45, 50 years as well. So I wanted to get it all down. I wanted to tell the stories of hope that would inspire people who are despairing. I wanted a place to give them all of the tools and techniques that we use. There are about 20 different tools and techniques, and tell them what the research is, give everybody who's reading it access to the research so that anyone could use this book to deal with the trauma they've experienced, however great or small that trauma is. I wanted to put it all in one place so it would be here. It's available, it's inexpensive. Anyone can get it, anyone can use it. And it's written, and I hope in a way that's easily accessible to people. I'm a writer as well as a doctor. That's part of my identity. So when I learn something that feels important, I want to share it in writing. So here it is. And what I've found, what people have told me, is it's not only very useful for sort of highly educated professionals, but people with little or no formal education who can read, and even those who can't read who can listen to it have found it so helpful. And I think that's because it is grounded in hope. It's very practical. It's, as they say in the trade, it's evidence-based.
Yeah.
It takes people step by step. And also, I think the thing about it is it's respectful. It says, okay, Elizabeth, you're going to put together your own program. I'm here to help you to look at all the possibilities and help you think through how to put it together. But you're an individual, and everybody who's reading the book is an individual. And my job is to help each individual find what makes most sense to them.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And that really comes across in the book. And another one of the books that you've written, that's one of my favorites, and I have it right here, is Unstuck. And I think what I love about both of these books, in addition to all of their really hands-on practical resources and advice that you have, is the stories that you tell. Because I think a lot of times when we're experiencing maybe mild forms of depression, or, just not feeling right, not feeling our best, feeling like something's wrong, that's a really isolating feeling. And it can feel like you can feel so alone in that situation, that reading about other people who have been through similar situations, who have been through maybe even more drastic situations than you have and come out on the other side, that's really inspiring and hopeful. So I really appreciate that as well about your books. And it comes across that you are a writer and an author. And I think that makes the book so much more relatable.
Right. No, for me, thank you, Elizabeth. For me too. I mean, when I was a kid, and at times I was very lonely as a kid, reading those books about kids who were dealing with hard times, whether they were on a ship, whether it was Robert Louis Stevenson or Dumas talking about this guy, the Count of Monte Cristo in prison, I could identify and I could feel, I liked the story. It entertained me, but it also inspired me. It also said hope and change are possible. And a little bit of courage, a little bit of action, it can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the favorite things about this book is that you say trauma comes to everyone. And we touched on this in some previous sessions during the summit. What is trauma, and how is it similar to or different than PTSD?
Sure, I'm glad you're asking. Trauma is a Greek word that means injury. Injury to the body, to the mind, to the spirit, to the social fabric. And it does come to everyone. I mean, my first trauma that I was aware of was when I was a medical student and I was, didn't know whether I wanted to continue, and my girlfriend and I broke up. But as I look back on it, there were other traumas early in my life, traumas of neglect, for example, or abandonment, maybe a more accurate way to say it. So, I think that trauma comes to children so often. If we look at the recent research on adverse childhood experiences, I think one of the major studies that was done showed that 61% of Americans who were surveyed, and these are middle class, upper middle class, mostly Caucasian adults. This is not people who were, impoverished and living in violent neighborhoods, but 61% of them had experienced at least one significant traumatic event, abuse, or neglect, or major disappointment as children. And if it doesn't happen when we're children, it's may well happen when we're young adults or in midlife. More than half of marriages end in divorce. I've never seen an untraumatic divorce. Maybe somebody has, but I haven't.
No.
We lose parents, we lose grandparents. And then if we're fortunate enough to live to old age, we have to deal with physical frailty, the loss of loved ones, and our own impending death. Trauma is a part of life. And this is an understanding that Indigenous people, the ones with whom I've worked, as well as the ones I've read about, they all understand this. We have created this, I don't want to dignify it by calling it a myth. It's a kind of fantasy that we can live a life that's perfect and ordered, and we can look good and slim, and everything's going to be fine if we just do X, Y, or Z. It's just not true. And it sets us up for even more suffering. The distinction is there that pain is going to come to all of us. Trauma is going to come to all of us. But we suffer a great deal more if we feel we shouldn't be traumatized. We should be able to deal with it. I work a lot now with veterans and with police. And part of that culture, and it's also, I don't know how many vets and cops are with us here, but there are probably a lot of health professionals. This is
Mhm.
part of the health professions as well. We should
Right.
be able to deal with anything.
Yeah.
That's our job.
Yeah.
But if the burden is heavy enough and the blows are frequent enough, any of us is going to suffer. Any of us is going to be traumatized. And if we can know that, then we don't feel guilty. We don't feel shame about our trauma. And we understand, and you mentioned this earlier, that we're connected to other people, that
Mhm.
it's not, when we're physically or psychologically traumatized, parts of our brain shut down that make it easier to connect to other people. So even in
Mm.
the middle of a war, I've seen people who will say, I feel so alone, even though everybody around them has suffered similarly.
Right.
So we need to know that this is part of life and that this simply means we're human, the fact that we've been traumatized.
Right. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. And I think maybe that's part of why we don't see trauma in other people, because there's a sense of shame, and that, you know, prompts us to be silent and not speak up about it and not seek the help that we would be healing for us, because we don't want to talk about it because we don't see everybody else. So it's almost like there's this trauma cycle happening where it's kept quiet because no one's talking about it.
Exactly. And one of the things that, in addition to that I say to people, in addition to reading Transforming Trauma and learning the skills and feeling the connection to the people in the book, it's also important to reach out to other people. And I encourage people to use the tools and techniques with others, family members or friends, because that connection is so healing. In
Mhm.
our model at the Center for Mind Body Medicine, a major part of our model is a small group, 10 people in a group, where you have an opportunity both to learn the tools and techniques that I teach in Transforming Trauma, and also an opportunity to share your experience with other people in a safe place. And you mentioned shame. People often come to those groups and they are ashamed of the way they feel. They're ashamed of what happened to them.
Right.
They still harbor the belief as adults that they're responsible for the poor treatment they may have received as children.
Yeah.
They still feel guilty for whatever may have happened in a relationship or in combat or at a work situation. And the group gives them an opportunity to talk about it and discover that other people, first of all, are also often enough ashamed or guilty. And after a while, to come to a place of acceptance in the embrace. And I don't necessarily mean physical embrace, but in the emotional embrace of people who are saying, it's okay. You're
Yeah.
okay just as you are. And we welcome you with your trauma, and we welcome you talking about it. A lot of us have been brought up and told not to, you know, the classic is, you're crying. Well, I'll give you something to cry about. And people carry with
Yeah.
them into adulthood. So we
Mhm.
say it's okay. If tears are there, if anger's there, if fear is there, if laughter is there, it's all welcome. All emotions are innocent, and all
Right.
emotions are welcome in this context. And we all need a place where we can go and feel free to be completely ourselves.
Absolutely. And so transforming trauma, I love just the title of this book. It's not accepting trauma. It's not understanding trauma, it's transforming. So can you tell us a little bit more about who should read this book, and what kind of transformation, transformation sounds like we can turn a negative into a positive. So could you speak to that a little bit more?
Well, as an author and as somebody who wrote the book for everybody and anybody, I say the book is useful potentially for anybody who's interested, anybody who wants to deal with trauma, anybody who wants to deal with chronic stress, anybody who wants some tools to help them become more resilient.
Mhm.
The book is, I wrote it I wrote it for everybody. I think the issue about transformation and about transforming trauma is that right from the beginning, in the book and my approach to people, there is the understanding. Again, this goes deep into human history and into my learning from indigenous healers in many places on the planet, is that if we allow ourselves to experience the trauma, if we allow ourselves to express what we need to express that's inside, there is a natural process of growth and healing. It has a number of steps. The beginning steps are to use techniques like slow, deep breathing with our bellies soft and relaxed. Doing it right now, as a kind of antidote to the fight or flight and stress response, which is the response that happens when we, not only when we see somebody who's out to beat us up, but when we're suffering psychological distress or trauma. So we need to bring our psychological and biological selves into balance. And slow, deep, soft belly breathing or mindfulness techniques, which I also teach, bring us into balance. And once we're in that state, we are, without any more than doing the breathing, we're less fearful, we're less angry, we're able to use our imagination and our intelligence better, and we're able to connect better with other people. That's on a purely biological basis. If we do this 10, 15 minutes a couple times a day, or even 3-4 minutes, 2 or 3 times a day. Also, the other part that's crucial, and this is often neglected in dealing with trauma, is the enormously powerful role our bodies can play in trauma healing. When we are traumatized, pretty much all the time we're in fight or flight, and the fight or flight continues. I'm working with the Capitol Police now, who are, really traumatized on January 6th. Every one of them recognizes they're spending a significant portion of their day in fight or flight now, far more than they ever did before. But also many people, including a number of the police, when the trauma is overwhelming and inescapable. And you can think of one of those cops on the steps of the Capitol being pummeled and beaten with sticks and stabbed and all the rest of it, and not having the resources to fight back and not wanting to use lethal force. They're overwhelmed, and the trauma is also inescapable. Well, the same thing is true for us if we were abused or neglected as children. The trauma was overwhelming and inescapable because the very people who were taking care of us are the ones who are inflicting it on us. So we couldn't get away. So the physical techniques, moving our bodies in general, is very helpful for restoring balance and mobilizing some of the important neurochemicals. But expressive meditations, shaking and dancing, fast, deep breathing, shouting, jumping up and down, whirling, etc., etc. These are tens of thousands of year-old techniques that have been used to help people melt trauma-frozen bodies, to bring up emotions that have been suppressed. So if we can begin, and this is how I begin transforming trauma, teaching the antidote to fight or flight, soft belly breathing, the shaking and dancing that can be the antidote to the shutdown freeze response. And once we become more biologically balanced, then it's so much easier to use all the techniques I teach or anything else you want to use. Individual therapy, you can use it far more effectively, or cognitive therapy or EMDR or any approach at all. But we need to come into balance psychologically and biologically, and then all the other techniques are so much more accessible and so much more effective.
That makes so much sense, because when we're suppressing emotions, and especially if it's, things that happened many or even decades ago that are suppressed and held within our bodies, we were just talking about this with one of the practitioners, is that we might not even be aware of it. So we're self-sabotaging in certain ways, showing up, in, maybe it could be hyper rational or judgment or the victim, all these ways that are the inner critic showing up subconsciously, and we don't know where they're coming from because we're not aware, because we've suppressed it. So that really makes sense, that bringing it, using all these multiple techniques to bring it to the surface is going to give us the opportunity to really transform. So that's beautiful. And you also mentioned that there's opportunity in trauma. So, you know, not only healing, but that suggests that the
Yes.
trauma could actually bring us to a place that we may not have gotten to without it. Could you explain a little more about that?
Sure. No, I'm glad you're bringing that up, because that is so true. We just finished. We've been working with the largest division of the VA system, Vision 8, Florida, South Georgia, and the Caribbean. And many of the people we're training to work with 1.5 million veterans who use that system are themselves veterans. And as they have been able to deal with their trauma, often combat-related trauma, a natural process has unfolded. And I don't know, I mean, I've certainly seen this in my life, and I imagine you have, and probably many of the people who are watching us have, that as we do something that helps and heals us, there is a tendency to want to share that with other people. It's just, it's a natural part of being human.
Yeah.
We're now, modern psychology, Tedeschi and Calhoun in particular, have written extensively about post-traumatic growth. And that's what we're talking about. It's what Indigenous people have always known. That as we move through and beyond our trauma, as we bring parts of ourselves online that have been suppressed, denied, repressed, or ignored, as we become, more complete and whole human beings, part of being a more complete and whole human being is wanting to share ourselves with others. That's built into our DNA.
Absolutely.
We grew up in, in tribal, as a species, we grew up in tribal societies where everybody, if you've ever spent time with Indigenous people, everybody, I'm not trying to glorify it, but everybody is with each other all the time and they're helping out, and all work is collaborative work. You don't send, rarely, maybe a scout will go out by themselves, but most everything that's done, childcare is a great example. And with Indigenous people, contrary to what we have in our so-called developed world, where a mom, usually it's the mom, is rushing around every place, taking kids here, taking kids there, often alone with 1, 2, 3 kids.
Yeah.
Indigenous people, it's 3 generations of women with a whole bunch of kids. Then the burden is not so heavy. And I think that sense of community and sharing, this is part of our DNA.
Yeah.
And as we come into balance, as we are more fully and easily and freely and gracefully ourselves, we want to help other people. I don't know if you've seen, when I'm feeling good and I'm walking down the street, I'm just kind of hanging out and talking with people and, having a chat with a homeless person. It just naturally comes. When I'm shut down and oppressed, not so much.
Right. Definitely. That's when you want to be alone.
The first study on this was very interesting, that in modern study, as I say, Indigenous people have always known this, was done on the aviators who were in the Hanoi Hilton. They were shot down over North Vietnam, and they were imprisoned. Hanoi Hilton, of course, is ironic. They were in prison for 2, 5, 6, 7 years, horribly tortured, psychologically isolated, traumatized, threatened. Every one of those aviators, it was a study done by an Air Force psychiatrist, every one of them said, it was horrible, and I think I'm a better person. And my wife or my girlfriend or my kids, they think I am too.
Wow.
Because they began to see that life is bigger than just being a, tough, sneering flyboy, there's more to it than that. And they softened up, they opened up, and they began, many of them got very interested in ecology, which had not interested in them at all before, but they saw the interconnectedness, not only among people, but between people in the larger sort of natural world in which we live. So it is a process. And what I do in the book is I say from the beginning, it is possible. And I give some examples of people who have been people here in the US who've been as horribly traumatized as one could ever imagine,
Mm.
become wonderful adult humans who are wonderful healers and helpers to other people as well. So it is a process. We need to encourage it. We need to understand that it's possible.
Right. And I really appreciate that you've positioned trauma as something that doesn't have to be imprisonment or being shot down or something like that. It can be, or even serious abuse. It can be a critical teacher, or the breakup with a girlfriend in college. So we're not recognizing it necessarily as trauma. So we don't recognize the effect it has on us. But by understanding now, like by reading this book or being familiar with their work and looking at the ways we've had trauma in our life that we didn't recognize before, it gives us the opportunity to really heal. So I really appreciate that. And I've been able to use it in my own life a lot. But I would love to hear more about your program for discovering wholeness and healing after trauma. It sounds very comprehensive. So I'd love for you to give us an overview.
Well, it is a comprehensive program. And I just want to add, though, that all of us have been traumatized these last 2 years.
Yeah.
COVID-19, my brother died early on in the pandemic.
Sorry.
Every person of color I know has lost family members and or close friends. And many, many people, many white people have had that I don't know, aside from my brother, I've had other friends who've gotten very, very ill. And we've all been threatened. It's not just the family and friends, it's the fact that our lives have been limited and threatened in very powerful ways. So this opportunity is now there, whether we want it or not, the opportunity is now there for all of us. The comprehensive program involves bringing us initially back into biological and psychological balance, and then mobilizing our imagination and our intuition to, for example, with guided imagery, to find solutions to problems that had seemed insoluble, simply by relaxing and going into a kind of altered state with breathing, and then asking, and the experiment that I suggest to people is asking for a guide to appear. Now, people, you don't have to believe in it, just see what happens. And if it's a bird, if it's a human, if it's a figure from literature or a scripture, whatever comes, and then have a dialogue. This is all, I think the important thing here, there's so many techniques, but the idea is to go to use them as an experimenter. This is not, this has to work. It's let's see if this works.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me when I do the guided imagery experiment with people who've never heard of such a thing before. And whether I'm doing it with veterans, or I'm doing it in a hospital system, or I'm doing it with executives, or doing it in a war zone, large numbers of people have an experience that is instructive. And because we've lost touch with our intuition and our imagination. Drawings are another wonderful way. One of the first experiments or exercises that we do, and people may want to do this themselves, is do 3 drawings. Draw yourself with your biggest problem, and draw yourself with your problem solved. And it gets us out of our rational mind. And, many of us are a little self-conscious about our drawings.
Right.
Except for the Haitian people. When I saw these amazing drawings when I was down there after the 2010 earthquake, I said to this gynecologist, this guy who lost his wife and lost his home, and he did this amazing drawing. And I said, you're doing this beautiful drawing. How come? Everybody seems to be. He looked at me and he said, this is Haiti. We are all artists.
Oh, that's beautiful.
But for the rest of us, it brings us into that kind of childlike play. We have to deal with self-consciousness with the art teacher who said unkind things.
Yeah.
But what happens on the page is you draw your biggest problem and you see, people say, oh, is that my problem? I didn't realize that. Or I thought it was X and it turns out to be Y. And then the third drawing of drawing the solution to the problem, again, is calling on our unconscious wisdom. And many times solutions come out and they're utterly unexpected. So let's say somebody is in a frontline worker in a hospital during the pandemic. And what they see is, the second drawing, the biggest problem are all these bodies and lack of resources and fear and the clock and the time. And then the third drawing, they draw themselves walking outdoors in the park. And they say, my God, that's what I need to do. I need to do that at the end of every day. So I do suggest another wonderful tool is to walk in nature. Nature is healing. And we're doing the scientific research into what perhaps should have been obvious, but now we know for sure we are nature deprived, most of us. And spending time in nature changes our neurochemistry and improves our mood and decreases our level of anxiety and enhances hopefulness, et cetera, et cetera. We can work with biofeedback, just learning how to control by relaxing and using temperature sensitive dots, sort of like the old mood rings. I don't know if you ever had a mood ring.
Oh yeah, of course I had a mood ring.
Just like
I'm a
that.
child of the 70s.
Yeah, well, you must have gotten it from your parents.
Oh yeah. Mom's
So what
mood
happens
ring.
is when you're tense, your hands get cold and clammy, and the temperature is lower, and the dot is brown or yellow.
Right.
And as you do slow, deep breathing, and imagine some phrases that mobilize the vagus nerve, which creates relaxation, you do that for 5 or 10 minutes, and you look at the dot, and the dot's now green or blue or purple. So you've seen that you can make a difference in how you feel. And we use many other methods, genograms that are, family trees to help us look for sources of strength and wisdom and inspiration in our families or in friends who are close. But so all of these tools are part of a comprehensive program. And I teach about 20 of them and provide all, the scientific evidence and the studies that have been done. Gratitude, very important. Forgiveness. One of the great difficulties when we're traumatized is we have such trouble, not just forgiving the person who may have hurt us, but more important, forgiving ourselves.
Right.
Because so often we feel I'm at fault. If I hadn't done this, then it wouldn't have happened. Well, maybe so, but it's time to move on, time to get over, time to forgive yourself for whatever part you may have played in hurting yourself. And each person will use these tools at different times, in different ways, in different combinations. And then transforming trauma is designed to say, there are many different ways to put together these programs. And it is a comprehensive program. And if you do it, and this is what we've seen in the research that we've done, we published maybe 25 papers on using this model and transforming trauma, along with some small group support. The change is likely to happen. And trauma is different from PTSD. PTSD means that it is all the symptoms of trauma, the anxiety, the agitation, the difficulty sleeping, the irritability, nightmares, flashbacks, emotional withdrawal, and shutting down emotionally. When it becomes disabling over a long period of time, then it fits into the diagnostic category of post-traumatic stress disorder. But the more important point is not whether you fit into that category or not, but what is actually going on. The only time I really focus on diagnosis, or we do, is when we're trying to do a research study. When we have a group or we're training people, the whole point is to invite anyone who wants to deal with the stress they've experienced, anyone who's experiencing post-traumatic stress or challenges in their lives, however they describe it. Everyone is welcome. And we have online groups that are available to anybody who's watching us.
Oh, that's
wonderful. At the Center for Mind Body Medicine website, they can come into those groups. Everyone is welcome. And the understanding, as we started off, is the trauma comes to all of us. So here's a way to learn the tools and techniques to build resilience and to have an opportunity in a place that's safe and supportive to share with others and to learn from others.
That's beautiful. And what I love that you said that's been consistent with the theme of the summit is that we have to be our own doctors. So there's no one solution, whether it's with breath work, whether it's with diet, whether it's with any of these practices, that it's not one size fits all. We have to find the practices that work for us. And I love that you have this wide variety of practices in your book and in your programs available so people can experiment and see what does work for them.
Yeah, and it's really important to have that opportunity, because there's a tendency in the world of medicine and psychotherapy to say, well, it's my way or the highway. This is it. And if you're not getting better, it's, people often feel they're being blamed for not, whereas it just may not be the appropriate approach.
Right.
So the whole idea and the tools that I teach and that we teach, they help you figure out. You can ask your wise guide, what's the appropriate approach? You can have a dialogue, a written dialogue with the conundrum of, should I spend more time in nature, or should I change my diet, or should I go to see this therapist, whatever it might be. And you can mobilize that intuition and that intelligence and imagination that all of us, doesn't make it, formal education has nothing to do with it, literally nothing to do with it. Kids as young as 3. We've worked with kids as young as 3. They can use these tools and techniques to help themselves. And we can all do it. It's important. We can do it on our own, and it's wonderful if you can be part of a group and where the leader of the group is there to, provide a safe place and teach the techniques and just be there for you and ensure that the group goes smoothly, not to fix you or not to tell you to do something, but to create the opportunity for each person to make their own discoveries.
And how empowering when you are able to discover what works for you and apply it and really be responsible for your own health. That's really the most empowering place you can be.
And to do it. We know that those people, there's a lot of research showing that people who become actively involved in helping themselves, whatever they're doing, do better than people who are just kind of passive recipients. Because that active engagement is itself deeply therapeutic.
Absolutely. And so we've got about 15 minutes left. And so I definitely want to have time to ask you about the role of food and nutrition in trauma healing, because that's one of the things we haven't really touched on during the summit. And I know that it just got such a strong impact. I'd love to hear your take on it.
Sure. Well, as it happens, I didn't plan it this way, but it turned out that the longest chapter in Transforming Trauma is on the trauma healing diet. And that's because there's a lot of information, a lot that I wanted to convey to people, a lot of evidence, and also because I read all the books on trauma that I could find as I was writing this, and before that, nobody's really written about it in any significant way. What happens to our gastrointestinal tract when we're traumatized is that it is damaged as surely and as completely and disrupted as our brain functioning is. It stands to reason. Every part of as we began by saying, every part of us is interconnected. Our thoughts and feelings affect our neurotransmitters, they affect our endocrine system, the hormones, they affect our immune system, and vice versa. Damage to any of those systems affect the way our brain functions. When we are traumatized, and I'm just going to give a couple of examples because this is really, it's a very important subject, and there's a lot of information. What happens, the trauma affects every part of our digestive system, from the way we think about food to what goes on in our mouth and our esophagus and our stomach and our intestines and our liver, and all affected. One of the places where it's most obvious is in the small intestine, which is the major organ for assimilating nutrients in our bodies. What happens when we've been traumatized is it disrupts our microbiome. You mentioned buying probiotics after reading the chapter. Microbiome is the trillions of bacteria that live in our gut. The good bacteria primarily in our small intestine. Those bacteria not only facilitate digestion, they also communicate with our immune system and with our vagus nerve, which is the major nerve in a major antidote to the fight or flight and stress response. So when our microbiome is disrupted, it disrupts the functioning of the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve can't help our trauma disrupted and damaged brains to repair as well as they should. For example, there's a neurochemical called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And it's one of the factors in rebuilding trauma-damaged brains. Vagus nerve regulates the production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. When the vagus nerve is not working well, we can't produce BDNF very well. So that's one. So we need to repopulate our gut with the good bacteria, the probiotics. Other piece, just one more brief, because it's a big subject and really interesting, and everybody can, by experimenting with diet, everyone can make a difference with how they deal with trauma. The other piece is that when we're traumatized or we've been stressed for a long time, the endothelial cells, the cells that line our small intestine, which are meant to be very closely connected to each other, they have what are called technically tight junctions. Those cells start separating. And as those cells separate, protein molecules that are not meant to go into our bloodstream cross the small intestine, go into our bloodstream, and can cause damage everywhere in our bodies. The ones that's best known, of course, is gluten. People who are never gluten sensitive before they suffered ongoing stress or trauma become gluten sensitive and may have the symptoms, not only digestive symptoms, but of inflammation in their joints. Then we call it arthritis. Inflammation in the brain. Then we call it depression, or we call it anxiety. We need to repair the GI tract, and we need to stop using so many foods that are so damaging to the GI tract, as well as dealing with the stress and trauma. And so that we can do that. So glutamine, for example, is a supplement that's very helpful in repairing the GI tract. And there are many, many others. And there are foods that are particularly useful for repairing the GI tract, and herbs as well. So we can use those. And as we work on our digestion, the wonderful benefit is that we also may well notice significant psychological changes, significantly greater ability to deal with stress and trauma.
That's fascinating, because that is one of the things you never think would be related to trauma. And it's just so fascinating how all of our systems are so integrated, from sleep to digestion to the breath. And really, by being consciously aware of all of these things and the way they work together, we can change so much. We can make so much positive progress in our lives, in our bodies, in our wellness, and our psychological health. So thank you for sharing that. And now I want to move on to a couple of questions that we have here. Dina T says, Dr. Gordon, your book Transforming Trauma came out while I was struggling with postpartum mood disorders. Your book, especially practices of soft belly breathing, shaking and dancing, and gratitude, transformed my life in this season. I've since realized perinatal mood disorders are rooted in trauma, not all big T trauma, but trauma nonetheless. Can you share your reflections on trauma for healing postpartum emotional struggles?
Yeah, first let me say something about the sort of big T, little t distinction. You know, I recognize that people I've worked with who've had 21 members of their families massacred in a war, that's a trauma that's almost unbelievable.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think it's really important to understand that trauma is trauma, and that it, and what's been so interesting to me is that in working with people who've suffered so massively, that when there are other people who have the kind of trauma that you're describing, when we're all in a group together, they don't really think too much, my trauma is bigger than your trauma. They're able to tune into what that trauma is. And I think it's important not to minimize. I think that's the first thing. That's my first response to you, is understand that this is significant trauma that you have experienced. Credit it, honor it as that. That's vitally important. Also, I think it's important we need to put particularly after postpartum trauma, I don't know. I think there are different factors that come into it. I'll just give you a few of them. One of them is simply on a physical basis. There's significant, there may have been sort of some disruption in the structure or challenges to the structure of your body during pregnancy and then in childbirth. And it may be very helpful to use some of the other techniques for relaxing the body. Soft belly breathing is a beautiful place to begin. You may want to use the body scan that I described, where you go inside, not just relax the body, but go inside and ask, whether it's your perineum or your uterus or any part of the body, what's going on? Tell me what's happening. You may be able to get some of these answers for yourself. Also, movement, physical exercise, and you suggested this through the shaking and dancing, is really important. Another issue that often comes up postpartum, and this may require, you may be able to get some of the assistance from using the techniques that I'm teaching, like the WISE guide or the dialogue with the symptom or the body scan. But there may also be issues that you may want some help from somebody else with, whether you join one of our mind-body skills groups or see a therapist. But often the trauma that follows childbirth has something to do with the birth of the person who has just had the child. If you understand what I'm saying, your own birth and early life, what your mother's or father's or family's attitude toward you may contribute to post-traumatic trauma and post-traumatic depression. The other thing, in addition to self-care, that I do acupuncture and Chinese medicine. I don't talk about that in Transforming Trauma. I do talk about it in Unstuck. That can be very helpful. I've treated people who've done very well with 1 or 2 treatments for postpartum depression. It's just a way of bringing the whole system into balance. Sometimes body work can be very helpful, especially gentle body work, craniosacral work. And this is where it's important. There's a lot you can do, a lot any of us can do for ourselves, but there are times, when help from others is really very important. I go to body work. I find it very helpful. I find it relaxing. It opens me up. It's a complement to everything that I do for myself, whether I'm doing Tai Chi or doing yoga or doing a bicycle or using these other self-care techniques, body work. And it really is nice to have somebody else work on you, on me, can be very helpful. So I think but go inside and use the techniques. I'm so glad you've been reading and working with Transforming Trauma. Ask you asked me, I'm giving you some of my thoughts, but ask yourself, because there may be something and it may surprise the hell out of you. Oh, that's what I should be doing. I didn't realize that. And I've had this experience many, many times when I'm coming up against, well, I'm here and I feel kind of stuck, and I just take that time to go inside and say, what now? What do I do? So I'm doing a little bit of that now, and it's saying, take a breath and relax your shoulders. That's the message to me right now. That's all I need to do right now. So thank you for the question, and thanks so much for using Transforming Trauma, and let me know how it goes. You can write me at jgordon@cmbm.org.
And you've got a message here. Hello, James, from Marcia in Redding, California. Thanks for bringing your CMBM skills to our area.
Yeah, you're welcome. We've been doing ever since the wildfires in Sonoma County, California. We've trained, I think, well over 200 people there who have been bringing our approach to many different organizations in the community, healthcare, education, social welfare, first responders. So if people are interested in that work, they should look at our website, cmbm.org. There's some description of charliemary.betty.mary.org.
Awesome.
We're working with communities all over the United States, and that work, and Sonoma County is one of them. And it's wonderful to be able to work with the whole community.
And we've got one more question from Debbie. We've actually got a couple more. We'll see if we can fit them all in, but this one's a fun one. In your website, what's the name of the song soundtrack used for Shaking and Dancing clip? I've searched endlessly and can't find it. And she says, forever grateful for what you do for humanity.
Thank you. She can't, or she or he can't find which?
The name of the song or soundtrack.
Oh,
that
the
he
song.
used.
The song.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, I'm not sure what's on the website because there are copyright problems. So the one that we use for the shaking, this is a 3-stage expressive meditation. The first stage is shaking. You just stand up with your feet shoulder width and your knees slightly bent, and you shake your body. We use music called Kundalini, and it's just electronic, fast driving electronic music, but you can use any drumming music, anything that is fast and rhythmic that will get you going. Then a couple minutes pause, and then the third stage of that expressive meditation, I like reggae. So when I'm working with a group of people, I very often use Bob Marley's Three Little Birds. Sometimes I'll use Jimmy Cliff. You can get it if you really want. Sometimes I use, I want to use something that's upbeat and inspiring. I like West African music too. So I use music by Oliver Ngoma, a Ghanaian, wonderful Ghanaian musician. But pick something that's energizing and inspiring for you. I tell the story in the book, but I'll just mention it here. At one point in my private practice, 3 women who didn't know each other, to whom I suggested shaking and dancing, all simultaneously selected the same song for the moving the body for that third stage. It was Carly Simon's "You're So Vain."
Oh, how funny, how random.
It was just, so you can imagine some of what they were going through. It was very helpful. They said, help me get out all that anger that I've been holding inside. It's great. So pick something that suits you. And it's different. Each of us is different. And each of us may want a different kind of music.
Awesome. Thank you. And we need to wrap up. I feel like we could keep talking for hours. There's so much more we could have covered, but we've gotten so much from this amazing conversation. And I want to be able to share with our listeners ways that people who are listening to this conversation, we've had a lot of questions in the chat about how to learn more, how to get more information about your work in the Center for Mind-Body Medicine. So where can people go to continue to access this information?
Sure, I'm looking at my cell phone because I have to look for myself at what the handles are. The Center for Mind-Body Medicine is at mind-body med. That's on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And the website is cmbm.org. For me, Twitter and Instagram is at Dr. James Gordon, all elided, all together, no, all lowercase, at Dr. James Gordon.
Awesome.
And you know, we have, as somebody mentioned, there are resources, online resources that you can get. There are videos of where I and others are doing these techniques, demonstrating them. All of our research is there so that you can read an abstract and you can find, if you'd like to find the complete article, you can. And information about our online mind-body skills groups. We have 8-week-long groups that are being led by people, our faculty and people we've certified. We have a sliding scale. We don't turn anybody away. And we also have training programs. And anybody who wants to learn to use this approach, the approach I teach in transforming trauma, for themselves and to share it with others, is welcome in our training program. And we have open trainings. Next one, I think, is in February. We just finished one. We had almost 300 people in the training. And in the training, we not only teach this material, teach these techniques in a large group, we had 29 small groups in that training. So everybody has the opportunity to experience and learn the techniques and also to experience the small groups model. And it is profoundly, we just finished a training with the VA. So many people said, this has changed my life. My 14, 15-year-old son who came with me to the Pine Ridge Reservation, he's 19 now. He just came because he had to do something for school, community service. And he came with me and he was just going to hand out things or work on tech stuff. I said, Gabe, as long as you're here, get in a group. get in one of these small groups. He said, I'll be the only white boy in the group. I said, so what? Get in the group. He came into the group. He was the only white person in the group. But as he spent time in these 8 2-hour groups with Native American adults and young people, he came to me. He said on the second day, he said, Dad, this is a life-changing experience. He said, I've been living in a bubble. And this is 5 years ago, and he's still texting with some of these kids who are in his group. He's gone to visit them. It changes people's lives. It opens them up to parts of themselves they've never understood. And also, and this is a wonderful benefit, it opens people up, like my son, to people with whom they would never have come in contact. And they have the opportunity to be, oh, that's who that, I'd read about such people, but no, we can play ball together. We can hang out. So I think this is an invitation for people who are interested in not just both learning what we have to offer and being part of this community that the Center for Mind Body Medicine is. So thank you, Elizabeth, for.
Thank you. This has been
me.
Such a powerful, resource-rich conversation. I can't thank you enough, Jim, for being here with us today.
My pleasure. Hope to see you again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's been a real joy, and we will be on break for the next 15 minutes, and then we'll come back with our final session. So thanks everybody for joining, and hope to see you in 15 minutes.